Hey everybody, welcome to video 13. Today we get to take a look at your axial bones. These are probably more so what you were expecting when you heard that we were going over the skeletal system unit. So we're finally starting to get into some of those 206 bones that you have in your body. So we're focusing on axial bones today. Remember, axial bones, your axial skeleton is going to be everything in your cephalic region plus the torso, so head and torso. So you have about 27 bones in the cephalic region, the head as well as the associated bones, about 26 in the vertebral region, and then another 27 contributing to your thoracic cage. So we'll start off with your cranium here. In your head, you have about 22 bones contributing to the head itself, not including those that are part of your ear ossicles. 22 of these bones, 21 are immobile. The only one that can move is your jawbone. And as high schoolers, I know you all are very familiar with that. You all love to move your mandible. There are a lot of different bones here. Obviously, 22 bones, way more than we're going to cover in this class. So I just wanted to highlight a few here. Start off with the frontal bone. Remember your frontal region, the frontalis muscle that sits here, the frontal lobe of your brain. This is also the frontal bone. You can see it's going to be everything towards the front, and then you can see the edge of it is going to be highlighted by that line there. That is a suture where that bone has begun to form a type of joint, actually, with the rest of the bones of your skull. We move down, you have the nasal bone. You actually have two nasal bones. If you break your nose, that could be something that you break. You definitely don't want to, though, because you're getting dangerously close to severing your olfactory nerve and causing some serious brain damage. Your zygomatic bone is actually where two bones meet. So your zygomatic bone sits at the front. It's going to be the anterior portion of your cheekbone, basically. Your maxilla are going to be, you have two maxilla, a right and a left. They're going to make up your upper jaw. Parietal bones are going to be the top and a little bit of the sides of your head. You have a right and a left one. So remember, here's our frontal bone and how it's divided up according to our sutures here. And then you have the parietal bones, the right and the left one, and they are split by another suture that runs down the middle of your head. And so you can kind of see where at one point you had these three bones all coming together here, and actually you still do. The temporal bone, so remember the zygomatic bone is going to be the anterior portion of your cheekbone. The temporal bone is going to contribute the posterior portion. So the temporal bone is going to sit back here, and then it's going to run forward in this zygomatic arch till it meets with that zygomatic bone to form the rest of your cheekbone. And then the one you high schoolers all love to use, your mandible. That is the movable jawbone. This guy does not like to sit in his mandibular condyles very well, so it always looks like his jaw is out of place. There we go. Not quite. Close. Anyways. Moving and looking from the side here, we already talked about the parietal bone, the temporal bone. You also have the occipital bone. They're going to be in the occipital region, the back of the skull. You can kind of see here. So there was the suture that separated your parietal bones. You also are going to have a suture right here that is separating your occipital bone from those parietal bones. But that occipital bone is going to be the back of your skull. You can see this external occipital protuberance to tell that the skull was molded after a male skull. We've already talked about the zygomatic process. We mentioned the external auditory meatus when we looked at bony landmarks, your ear hole right there. Another one, some other structures that you have here are your mastoid process. You can actually feel your mastoid process just posterior to your ear. Kind of this thicker little projection down here. And then you also have the styloid process. And this one has tape on it, so you can't really tell. But you can see on this picture here, it's very long, it's very thin. Those of you that are Android users, some of your phones may have came with a stylus, and that's actually where it gets its name, is for looking like a stylus that you would write with. We already mentioned the frontal bone, the nasal bones, the zygomatic, maxilla bone, the mandibles. One thing I will show you is the mental foramen. You'll remember from our bony landmarks that foramen are holes in bones. You actually have two in your mandible, in your jawbone. So a right and a left one. Those foramen in your mandibles allow blood vessels and allow nerves to nourish your jawbone. Moving on to your vertebra. Remember that there are three sections of your vertebra. We talked about these during Unit 1 with our anatomical regions. You have your cervical, your thoracic, and your lumbar vertebra. Each vertebra in each section is going to have its own name. There's two that have special names. The rest have just generic names. So, for example, C7 is going to be the seventh cervical vertebra. So you start at the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That seventh one is going to be C7, is what we would call it. T4, you go to your first thoracic vertebra and count 1, 2, 3, 4. There is T4, your fourth thoracic vertebra. And then L1 is going to be your first lumbar vertebra. So you go to the first lumbar, you don't even have to count down. That is L1. So that is how we can count through each of the vertebrae that you have. Each vertebra has its own, or each section I should say, has its own distinct shape. I'll show you a picture or a model here of a cervical vertebra. Cervical vertebrae tend to be very, very small. As you move down, each vertebra gets a little bit larger each time because it needs to be able to bear a little bit more weight. Ways that you can identify this as a cervical vertebra: it has these transverse foramen, these holes running through the sides on the edges here. They also have these transverse condyles, I think they're condyles, where they have these articulating surfaces, and as well as this articulating surface in the middle where each of them are going to stack up. Also, this spinous process off the back here tends to be fairly horizontal and even with the rest of the vertebra. Moving on to your thoracic vertebra in the middle here. These are going to be of middle size. Let's see if I can grab the right one here. And I always recognize thoracic vertebrae because they look like giraffes to me. And I know I mentioned that in an earlier video, but when you look at them, they almost look like giraffes. So ways you can identify a thoracic vertebra: they're going to have these long, thin, transverse processes here. They're going to have a slightly thicker base here for them to be able to bear weight, and they're going to have a decently sized vertebral foramen here. The spinous processes, the more you'd start to see them become, or they start to point inferiorly more as you go through. So you can kind of see here these thoracic vertebrae tend to point very much inferiorly as you go through. Then lastly, your lumbar vertebra. These are massive vertebra. Really everything about the 5 lumbar vertebrae you have is very, very stout. Everything from this weight-bearing portion here. You'd have intervertebral discs between each of these, but your discs between these are especially big and important for making sure that you can bear your body weight as well as anything you may be carrying. They have massive vertebral foramen running through them, very stout transverse processes coming off the side. This spinous process is very thin and very tall. So that's just a way that you can identify those if you're looking at them individually. After the lumbar, moving inferiorly, you have the sacrum and then the coccyx. The sacrum is a very, very large set of fused vertebrae. And if you were to look at it, it's actually fairly easy to see where each of those vertebrae had fused together. And then the coccyx is another fusion of a few vertebrae, but it is very, very small. And it is your tailbone that's going to attach to your sacrum. If somebody breaks their tailbone, they probably did something to their coccyx. Interesting things about the coccyx: women can actually move them. So if you think the sacrum and coccyx really are your old ancestral tail, you kind of think of that way. Women can actually wiggle their tails. It's useful during childbirth to get that coccyx out of the way. And when you sit, just because of the curvature of your coccyx, the coccyx does flex. So, interesting note is with tummy time. So when a baby is born, because of the fetal position that they're in, they have a very pronounced C shape to their spine. So tummy time allows them to actually look up because they want to be able to see where mom is, where dad is, as well as see their surroundings. That strengthens the neck muscles that they have, and eventually those neck muscles will form a secondary curve in that cervical region to where you'll get the kind of the final shape of the neck. So that's why tummy time is important. As those babies begin to stand, as they begin to walk, their lumbar vertebra begin to bear more weight, and you start to get another secondary curve right there. But here you can see that C shape in the newborn spine just from being in the womb for 9 months. Some special vertebra that you have is your C1 and C2 vertebra. So your atlas and your axis. Atlas is your C1 vertebra. The way I remember that, atlas comes before axis in the dictionary. So C1, C2, atlas, axis. The atlas and axis, or the atlas sits on top of your axis, and you can see that picture there. The atlas is going to be your no vertebra. So when you shake your head no, that atlas is actually pivoting across that axis vertebra in order to move your head to nod your head no. You can see the dens of your axis here and that transverse ligament that the atlas has that wraps around it in order to be able to stay in place while you nod your head no. The axis is going to be your yes vertebra. At that point, you need to activate 2 of your vertebrae in order to nod your head yes. Because the atlas cannot pivot, obviously, to have your head nod yes, so you have to activate a second vertebra to get your head to at least nod no, or at least nod yes, sorry. Moving on to your ribs and sternum. Humans have 12 pairs of ribs. This is applicable to both men and women. There are 7 true ribs. The reason we call them true ribs is because they originate from your vertebra, not attached to your vertebra, but basically from your thoracic region of your vertebra, and they do connect to the sternum. 3 false ribs, meaning they're going to connect to the rib just superior to them. So rib number 8 connects to rib number 7. Rib number 9 connects to rib number 8. So you can kind of see the cartilage that's attaching here. And then you have 2 false ribs, which are your floating ribs. They do not connect at all. Your sternum has 3 parts. You can kind of see those 3 parts in this image here. You have the manubrium sitting superiormost here, the body of the sternum, and then ending with that xiphoid process. Remember that xiphoid process is going to be, some people it might poke in, some people they have a hole in their chest, some people it might poke out. I actually do have this here so you can see manubrium, superiormost, the body, and then the xiphoid process, and you can see where these ribs and the cartilage from the ribs are either attaching to the sternum if they're a true rib, or to the rib above them if they are a false rib. And so those are the 3 parts that I just mentioned there. Okay. Some special bones that you have, the hyoid bone. You can see here it sits just posterior to your mandible. It is actually the bone that is connected to your tongue. So you can see here a little U-shaped bone. It's going to be the only bone that your muscle or that your tongue is attached to. And so your tongue is special because it's the only muscle with only one connection. And that's what allows us to have such great speech compared to other species. To find your hyoid bone, it actually is slightly superior to your Adam's apple, and you can actually push right there, just posterior of your mandible and superior of your Adam's apple. If you push there, you can actually feel your tongue kind of move from the pressure that you apply there. So that was a very long and full 15 minutes of bones of your axial skeleton, and we didn't even get to the ossicles of your ear. We won't really get to those much at all this year. So Again, if you have questions, please let me know. Use the updates tab, and don't forget about the quiz that there is over this video.